once again, thank you so much for being here at Hope Community Church. We're in part 3, it's part 3, isn't it, of our sermon series that we're calling To an Unknown God. And the reason we're doing this series is we are attempting to answer a question. The question is simply this: what is God really like? What is God really like? What's His deal? What is He really like? There's a lot of ideas about God, a lot of information about God out there, a lot of different thoughts. But what is God really like? And as I've explained the previous 2 weeks, we're not talking about the God of Christianity per se, because Christianity is kind of a vague thing, and sometimes, actually you've got Christians on every side of every argument, and this Christian doesn't believe the same thing as that Christian, so I don't even know how to define Christianity, so I don't know how to define the Christian God, so we're not talking about the Christian God, we're talking about the God of this book, the God that we meet in the pages of the Bible. And so we're trying to get to know this God, the God that we meet in the Bible. And so some of you believe this book, you believe it's true, you believe that the information recorded here is accurate, some of you may not. Whether you believe it or not, by the time we're finished this series, you'll be able to walk away and say, okay, now I know something about the God of the Bible and what He is really like. That's our goal here. And so you've seen me play with blocks over the past 2 weeks, right? Because I like to do that. And every time I come over here, I feel like Mr. Rogers. I don't know. Anybody watch? Do you even know who Mr. Rogers is? Do people know Mr. Rogers anymore? Walking over, go to his different station, playing with his blocks. But we have all these pieces of information about God, all these different ideas, pieces of information. And over the course of our lives, what do? We accumulate these pieces, and we start to build up our idea of what God is like. And that kind of looks good there, so I think that's what God is like, and He's loving, and He's kind, and He's got some wrath, or whatever it is. We get these ideas, we get it from all sorts of places. We get it from Sunday school. If you went to Sunday school as a kid, you might get it from church, you might get it from your friends, you may get it from your teachers. You go to college, and you get some pieces, and you add it to your puzzle. And we don't have to be very intentional in building our idea of what God is like. It doesn't require a lot of intentionality. Just over time, we start to build this picture of God. And so really, as we're going through this series, I'm encouraging you and I'm challenging you to take a look at the idea of God that you have built up over the years and start to pick it apart. Say, why do I believe this about God? Is it because it's in the Bible? Is it because I heard it in church? Is it because I heard it on the news? Why do I believe these things about God? So that's why we're doing this series. And so, by the time you leave today, I'm going to attempt to give you another piece, not literally a piece out of that box, but a piece of information that you can add to your idea of who God really is and what He is really like. Okay? But before we talk about God, I want to talk to you about a man that we meet in the Bible. We meet him in the Old Testament, and his name is Job. His name is Job. Some of you have heard about Job. J-O-B, looks like Job, pronounced Job. And Job is an interesting man. He's got an interesting story. Interesting is one word for it, I guess. But we meet Job in the Old Testament, and he's got a whole book named after him, Book of Job. And some people, when they look at the Book of Job, some Christian people, they believe that this entire book, the entire Book of Job, this entire account of his life, they believe that it's just one big parable, one big story that illustrates a point. That there wasn't really a guy named Job, but this is just like a story and it teaches us something and we're supposed to learn a valuable lesson from it. Some Christian people believe that. Other people believe that this is an actual historical account of a man who lived and what his life was like. Okay? I believe that. I believe that Job really did exist. That it's more than just a parable. And I have a reason, I've got my reasons why I believe that. I take the Bible very literally. That's just me. Also because when we see parables throughout Scripture, when we get to the time of Jesus and when He tells stories, they're usually, the characters in the stories aren't given names and all the people here are named. And so I think this really happened. I believe there was a man named Job, and what we read about him in this book actually did happen. Now we have some questions about Job. People who are far more intelligent than myself have studied this book and they've tried to figure out, well, when did Job's story take place in history? And so there are some different ideas about when his story took place. Some people think that his story took place around the time of Abraham. And so those of you who are somewhat familiar with the Bible, Abraham lived at a time, and this was like before Moses, before the Ten Commandments, before the nation of Israel was really a thing, back then. Okay, so back like Book of Genesis time period. And so that's where we meet Job. And I think that's probably when Job lived, although we're not exactly sure, and I'm not sure how much it really matters when exactly he lived. Something interesting to note about Job is that he probably was not an Israelite man. That's interesting because when we look at the Old Testament, most of the Old Testament tells the story of God and His special relationship with the nation of Israel. Every once in a while we meet people outside of that nation of Israel, and so we think that Job was probably outside of the nation of Israel. We're not sure about it. How relevant is it? Well, you decide. Okay? And so we meet Job. Now, one thing we know about Job is that he was, quote-unquote, a good man. He desired, here's what I mean by good man. He desired to do the right thing. He desired to please God with his life. He wanted God to be pleased with him. Let me read you a little bit about Job. I'm in the book of Job, chapter 1. In the land of Uz, U-Z, not Oz, but Uz, there lived a man whose name was Job. This man was blameless and upright. He feared God and shunned evil. He's blameless, not sinless, because no one's sinless, nobody's perfect except for Christ himself. But he was blameless. That meant as far as it depended on him, he was sure to do the right thing. If there was ever a mistake, he would acknowledge it, he would take credit for it. He was a blameless man. You couldn't say something went wrong and it's Job's fault. He was a blameless man, fearing God. And that means he did not want to face God's wrath. He loved, he wanted to please God. He feared God. And he shunned evil. You know what it means to shun. Like the Amish community here in Pennsylvania, they shun people who do things bad. He shunned evil. So anything that was evil was not allowed into his life. And so this is something we know about Job. It's interesting because we're doing this series trying to get to know God better. Job had a very different understanding of God than we do. Because Job didn't have this. He didn't have the Bible. It wasn't written yet. I mean, it was happening. He didn't have any kind of source to go to learn all these details. I mean, we have all these details about God here. Job didn't have that. All right, what he knew about God was probably very little compared to what we can know about God by studying the Scripture. And so he may have had ties to the Israelite community. Like I said, we don't know if he was an Israelite man or not. He may have heard some stories about, God in the past. He may have been familiar with maybe a story about the creation. But really what Job had is he had his surroundings. He looked outside, he saw the creation, he said, okay, there must be some kind of a creator, there must be some kind of God, and I want to please him. And so that's how he lived his life. Maybe he only had 2 little pieces of information about God, but that's all he had, and he worshipped that God. Okay, that's all he had, and he worshipped that God. In Job chapter 1, verse 2, just for reference, Job had 7 sons and 3 daughters. Wow. He owned 7,000 sheep, 3,000 camels, 500 yoke of oxen, 500 donkeys, and had a large number of servants. He had a vacation property and a yacht. Okay? All right, I added those last 2. But he was rich. Okay? Or as Job would say, he was blessed by God. He saw all the things he had as from this mysterious God above. He saw this as a gift from God. He had these children. He had these 7 sons, these 3 daughters, and all these animals. I mean, those were riches. I mean, that was like the equivalent of, I don't know, what do you think of as a rich person today? They have cars, they have a big house, they have whatever. I mean, he had it all. And he credited God with what he had. He had all these things. And so that's something we know about Job. Well, then he loses it all. He loses it all. And listen, you come here and you hear me talk for 20 or 30 or 40, whatever, however long I talk. And it's like, I give you an idea of what happens in the Bible, but you just got to read this stuff for yourself. I'm giving you like the Reader's Digest version. You got to read this book for yourself. It's very interesting. There's some big, crazy stuff that happens. But I'm going to tell you what happens to Job on this very, very bad day that he has. Verse 13. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house, a messenger came to Job and said, the oxen were plowing and the donkeys were grazing nearby, and the Sabeans attacked and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword, and I am the only one who has escaped to tell you. He's like, guess what, Job? I'm your servant. The rest of your servants have been killed, and these people came, and they stole all of your donkeys. Donkeys gone. And so you're receiving that news. You're like, oh, I can't believe that. I lost all my donkeys. That sounds weird. I mean, like, I don't know. What can we equate that to? I don't know. I lost all my donkeys. Oh, no, they were stolen. I mean, it was his wealth. It was taken from him. And while he was still speaking, while this servant was going over this, somebody else comes. Verse 16. Another messenger came and said, the fire of God fell from heaven and burned up the sheep and the servants, and I am the only one who's escaped to tell you. So here comes another servant saying, hey, remember how you had sheep? Not anymore. And this servant describes it as a fire of God fell from heaven. That's how the servant describes it. Not saying somebody came in and stole. Not saying, no, there was a natural disaster. No, the fire of God fell down from heaven. You should have seen it. It was awful. Burned up the sheep. Killed all of your servants. I'm the only one survived, and here I am to tell you. Verse 17. While he was still speaking, another messenger came and said, the Chaldeans formed 3 raiding parties, swept down on your camels. See where this is going? Swept down on your camels and made off with them. They put the servants to the sword. I'm the only one who has escaped. It's all gone, Job. You're losing your servants. They're being killed. You're losing your possessions. They're being stolen. Gets worse. While he was still speaking, yet another messenger came and said, your sons and daughters were feasting and drinking wine at the oldest brother's house. And when suddenly a mighty wind swept in from the desert and struck the 4 corners of the house, it collapsed on them, and they are dead. And I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. What did this take? A minute, 2 minutes for all this to happen? I mean, it's all gone. It's all gone. And it's like, you know, we get the idea, Job, he's a good man, he's a blameless man, he's got character, he certainly has strength about him, he's relying on God, but it's like, okay, you stole my donkeys, you took away my sheep, and all that. Wait a minute, you know it. My family? My children? Gone. It's all gone. At this point, he stands up and he tears his clothes. I mean, that's like a thing that they did back then. And he sits down just in the dirt. He's wearing sackcloth. And that's tough to describe. And as we get into chapter 2, we read that it gets even worse for Job. He's covered from foot to head. He's covered with sores all over his skin. It's so painful that he grabs a piece of broken pottery and starts scratching at himself. Ugh. What a disgusting imagery we have there. I mean, it's awful. He's just sitting in the dust, in the dirt, in sackcloth. We don't do that kind of thing now, but have you ever had a day like that? Well, not like this, but not this bad. But a day where it's like, I'm not getting out of bed, I'm not showering, I'm not even bothering to get out of my pajamas, I just feel so awful. Ugh. I mean, that's what he was going through, just sitting and mourning in ashes. Just sitting there. And here's what it says about Job in chapter 1, verse 22. In all this, and everything that he had experienced, everything that he had lost like that, Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. Job did not sin by charging God with wrongdoing. It doesn't say that he wasn't blaming God. Maybe blame's the wrong word. It's not saying that he wasn't saying, okay, God is behind all this, or God could have intervened. I know God, I believe he's good. He could have intervened, and he didn't. I mean, there's something about Job that's willing to acknowledge that God was the one who gave it, and God is the one who can take it away. But he wasn't saying that God did anything wrong. You know, we have that song that we sing sometimes here at Hope. Blessed be your name. Do you know that one? You give and take away. You give, you take away. My heart will choose to say, Lord, blessed be your name. That's based on what Job said and what he went through. And so when all this was taken from him, he said, God, you were the one who blessed me with my beautiful children and with all of my wealth and all that I have. You gave it, and it was yours to take away. He's not claiming to understand what happened, but he does not charge God with wrongdoing. Now, Job has some friends that have difficult to pronounce biblical names. And when these friends find out what Job has gone through, what he's just endured, I mean, they're shocked, they're horrified, and they do something very, very wise, at least initially. They go to Job, and they sit down with him in silence. Just sitting there with him. And that is such an important thing. And I want you, this isn't the point of today's sermon or anything, but I want you to learn something from this. I mean, there's something powerful about just coming along somebody who's going through a tough time and just being present with them. Saying, it is as if they were saying to Job, you are suffering, you are going through a difficult time. What can we say? We can't say anything, but you don't have to suffer alone. Job, we're here. We'll sit down in the ashes together. You might have to suffer, but you don't have to suffer alone. And so that's what they did. And that was wise. But then they make a mistake. these friends of Job's. After a while, they're sitting around thinking, well, somebody ought to say something, right? Who's going to say something? You going to say something? Should I say? Okay, I'll say something. Job, seems that, you've had a lot of bad stuff going on lately, and we're your friends, and we care about you, and we love you, and we're talking among ourselves, and we're thinking that there's got to be a reason that God has done this to you, or at the very least that God has not intervened, and so we're thinking, Job, we know you have this reputation for being blameless and all that, but we're thinking, Job, you must have done something like really, really, really wrong to have earned this punishment. And so that's what they start, and they're smart guys. I mean, they give these eloquent speeches one after the other, explaining to Job, like, Job, and they try to package this information. I'm paraphrasing. Again, read it for yourself. They package their speeches, and they try to, present these ideas gently to Job. Job, not to offend you, I'm not going to say. I'm not saying it's all your fault that you lost everything, but I guess I am kind of saying it's your fault. You must have done something to earn God's wrath. There must be a reason. It must be you. Job, you're the reason. It's your fault, Job, that you lost everything. That's the underlying message of what these friends keep trying to say. It's your own fault. And Job says, oh, well, thanks so much for the pep talk, guys. Thanks for your words of comfort. Oh, where would I be without you? No, Job says, what, this? He says, guys, you don't understand God, and you don't understand me. I don't deserve this. This isn't like that. This isn't about my sin. This isn't. And Job, can you imagine going through something like this and then having to listen to your friends come up with these theories about why it's happened and blaming you for all this? Man! And so there he is, listening to his friends, right? Yeah. I think this is a mistake that sometimes those of us who are Christians, we do this. We do this thing of like somebody's going through a tough time and we start coming up with the theories. We start patting, we open our mouths. It's one thing to be present, but then we open our mouths and we say the wrong thing because we feel like, hey, we got to say something, right? I've got this friend and he's going through a hard time and he's like, I don't know what to say, but something needs to be said. I'm supposed to be the Christian. I'm supposed to know something about God. I'm supposed to give a godly perspective, so I'll say something. No. I mean, what kind of things do we Christians say? We say, well, it all happens for a reason. Yeah, everything happens for a reason. Wow, thank you so much for telling me that. If any of you come up to me when I'm going through a tough time and say, oh, it's all right, Josh, it all happens, I'm going to slap you if you say it, all right? You must say, oh, that just happened for a reason, okay? It all happened for a reason. Okay, you know what, that may be true, but is that comforting? No. Here's the other thing. Here's the other thing that we Christians sometimes say. Yeah, we say, it all happens for a reason. Sometimes we say this, listen, I know you're going through a tough time, but God won't give you anything that you can't handle. Is that comforting? No. I don't even think that's true, by the way, because when I read this book, and this is like your bonus piece of information about God, I see God always giving people things that they can't handle. God, you've given me too big of a burden. You've given me too big of a task. I can't handle it. And in their weakness and in their frailty, they turn to God. Say, God, I can't. You can. So sometimes we Christian people just need to shut up. Okay? Just be present. And listen, I've been there too. And it's not like we're insensitive. It's not that. That's not why we say that. We just don't know what else to say, right? We feel like we got to say something. And so we say the wrong thing. But I'm here to tell you, we don't need to say something. I let go of this a long time ago. People come to me and like, oh, you're not just a Christian. You're a pastor. You're supposed to have the answers. I don't have the answers. Most of the time, I don't know. You tell me why God did something or why he didn't intervene. I'm like, I don't know. He didn't ask me, but he didn't consult with me. I don't know. Like, I know some stuff about God. Don't get me wrong. Why am I even here? The pastor doesn't know anything. I know some stuff, but there's so much that's unknowable. And I'm not going to pretend to know it, and neither should you. Like, I'm sorry. I'm not okay with it. I don't agree with God's decision. I'm sorry you're going through this. I'm with you. You don't have to go through it alone. There you go. And so Job's going through this difficult time, and he's experiencing all this. And he finally gets to a point. Not where he's like, I know it's not because of me. I know I didn't earn this. But he gets to a point where he just prays out sincerely to God. And I believe that God values this kind of prayer so much. He speaks his heart. He's saying, God, why? Would you please tell me why? Why have you taken this from me? Why, God? Why? And God does something that he usually doesn't do. Okay? And, you know, sometimes we read the Bible and we see God showing up and speaking, and he shows up in a burning bush to Moses, and that was weird, and he shows up in a big thunderous voice. And, like, God appears to people, God speaks to people, but like when you take a look over the whole span of history that's covered in the Bible, it doesn't happen all that often. But when Job cries out, why God? God decides that he's going to, quote-unquote, answer. Or at least respond to Job's question. And I'm going to do something very dangerous right now, and I'm going to paraphrase God's response. Read the last several chapters of the book of Job. Chapters. God has a lot to say back to Job. And so Job asks God the question, why, God? Why have you done this? Why have you allowed this to happen? And this is what God says. He says, Job, where were you when I created the heavens and the earth? Where were you, Job? Where were you when I decided how big to make the planet, and where the water should stop, and where the land would be, and how the air would exist, and where the heavens should stop, and where the earth would be? And when I decided all these things, and when I decided where all the trees should be, and when I created the animals, Job, where were you when I was creating everything? When I took nothing and made something, Job, where were you? Where were you, Job? Where were you in all that? And he goes on and on and on and on and on, asking Job the question back, where were you? And really what God is saying in all this, and Job gets the message, believe me, he gets the message loud and clear. And here's, you know, again, very dangerous to paraphrase, to put words in God's mouth. I'm not trying to do that. Just read it for yourself. It is as if God is saying, Job, listen, I appreciate what you're going through, and I love you deeply. I hear you asking me a question, why? But you need to know something. I am God, and you are not. I do not owe you an answer. I don't. And Job, if I gave you the answer, what makes you think that you could understand it? That's really it. That's really it. Job, if I gave you the answer, what makes you think that you would understand it? Job, I'm not like you. This is what God says. I'm not like you. You weren't there. I was there. I did all the creating. I am God. You are not. You can't, you wouldn't fathom it. It wouldn't make any sense to you. If I tried to explain, you're limited. You're finite. How would you be able to handle the answer? That's it. That's the book of Job. And so here's your piece of information for today that I'm going to give you. Here's what I'm going to tell you about God today, all right? The one thing I want you to take away. You are not God. You are not God. That's it. They might be thinking, did I need to get out of bed to hear that? I already knew that I'm not God, okay? But really, we need to appreciate this. We work on different levels. I want you to take a look at the scripture that's in your bulletin that Tom read for us from Isaiah. Now, Isaiah was a prophet, and Isaiah reported down some of the words that God spoke to him. And so we're gonna go back to verse 6, but I want to jump down to verse 8 and then go back to verse 6 here. Verse 8 says, and this is God speaking to a man, to a human being. And he says, for my thoughts are not your thoughts. I think about things in one way, you think about them in another way. Neither are your ways my ways. You have your understanding. You have your ways. You have your way of going about life and your business. I operate on a different level, declares the Lord. As the heavens, listen to this. Okay, it really makes the point now. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. I love you human beings, is what God says. I love you so much. You're precious to me. But you're operating down here, and I'm working up here. You don't have the perspective that I have. You don't have the intellect that I have. How many of you are pet owners? Anybody have a dog or whatever? All right? Do you ever try to communicate with your pet on like a deep level? and explain to your dog, listen dog, I'm going to work. I'll be gone for about 9 hours and then I'll be back. Oh, okay, I understand that. I mean, your dog doesn't get it. Whoa, you're back. I thought you'd never come back again. Okay, all right. Now I'm gonna go back the next. You gotta go back. Yeah, I gotta go back to work the next day because I gotta make money so I can give you a house to live in and buy you food. Oh, I understand now. The dog doesn't get it because your ways are higher than your dog's ways. Wait a minute, you calling us dogs? I'm just saying, compared to God, there's this great, I mean, it's more like, you know, we're like a single-celled amoeba or something. I don't know. We're just compared to God, we're different in nature. Now, God has given us, He's made us in His own image, but that doesn't make us equals. Far from it. God's ways are not our ways. And if there is something to be learned from the book of Job, and again, I don't want to be like theorizing all this, but it's like, I mean, here's Job, and he learned it the hard way. Okay, difference. We're different. This is something that Job, and remember I told you, Job didn't have a lot of information about God. This is something that he now, okay, we're working at different levels here. You're God, I'm not. Okay. And the story of Job, I mean, it does have a happy ending. God does bless Job. He gives Job his stuff. More stuff than he had before, more livestock, more cattle. Job even has more sons and daughters. But let's be honest, I mean, having more children, that's great, but that doesn't take away the pain and the grief of the children he lost. And I believe that the happy ending to the story is the fact that Job eventually dies and gets to meet this God face to face and be reunited with all the people, all his servants and his children that he lost. I mean, that's the happy ending, I think. But we need to learn from this. We need to take some stuff away. We are not God. He is. I told you I want to go back to the beginning of that passage in the bulletin, verse 6. It says, seek the Lord while he may be found. Call on him while he is near. Seeking after the Lord. I believe this is something Job did. He wanted to know God. He wanted to understand him. Now some of us people, listen, I'm sorry to pick on Christians. I'm one too. But sometimes us Christians, we don't go to this book seeking after the Lord. We're not seeking after God. Instead, you know what we do sometimes? We get this thing. It just happens to us. I don't know how it happens. When we start thinking, okay, we're the Christians. We're the ones who have God on our side. We get to speak for God. We get to make decisions for God. We get to tell other people what God likes and what God doesn't like. We get to tell people what God hates and what He loves. We get to tell people all about God. And if I don't like something, then that means that God doesn't like it because I'm a Christian, and so whatever I like must be good, and whatever I don't like must be evil. And so I'm sure God agrees with me about everything. And so if I think Harry Potter is evil, then I'm sure that God thinks Harry Potter is evil. Okay? And that's what I'm going to go tell everybody. Right? And if I think country music is evil, then I'm going to say that God thinks country music is evil, okay? Which, by the way, I do think that. But like half of you would never come back. No. And if I say, well, God thinks it's evil. No. I mean, there are these things. We just get these things in our minds. Like, I think that because I'm a Christian, I'm somehow equal with God, and I can make decisions for Him about what He likes and what He doesn't like. Have I sought after Him? Am I seeking to find out what He really cares about? Nah, I just know because I'm a Christian. I got it all figured out already. I mean, I've been to church, I know God, and I got it. Have you been seeking Him? No, I haven't been seeking Him. I just assume that what I like is what He likes, and what I hate is what He hates. I hope I can get this quote right, because I wasn't planning on saying this, but I can't even remember the book. But the author says that you can tell you have created God in your own image when it turns out God hates all the same people that you do. Boom! We do that. We do that. And again, do we try to? Is that something we're doing intentionally? If we're not careful, we can start to shape our idea of God based on ourselves, our preferences, what we like, what we don't like. I mean, there's this big puzzle of Christianity. There's all this Christian stuff that I don't understand. Christians, like there's these different Christian clubs, different Christian circles. It's like they all get together and they make some decision about God. Do they seek after Him in the book, in the Bible, or not? I don't know. They just decide, okay, we're all going to rally around this particular idea we have about God, whether it's right or wrong. I mean, that's why do we have all these denominations? Why do we have all these different branches of Christianity? This is why. Because people get together and say, are we all going to agree that this is what God is like? Yeah, okay, we'll all agree. Okay, we're a denomination. We're a branch of Christianity. It's like if we could just stop doing that and actually seek after God, then we'd all be united. Isn't that interesting? And listen, some of you right now, some of you are praying for the people in your lives who don't know Jesus. Some of you have invited people to church and they're just not coming with you. And this is part of the reason why, because we've messed up as Christians. Because I have failed. We have failed as Christians to really share the true God with people. We've become too obsessed with defining Him and building Him up based on our own preferences. It's like it doesn't work that way. I mean, does any of this make sense? I feel like I'm really, I'm beating a dead horse here. I'm trying to make this point. It's like, all right, here's an issue. Take gun control, okay? All right, I'm not going to say what I'm not. There's people who believe, okay, guns are bad, we need to get rid of guns, and so we're all Christians, we believe guns are bad, and so God hates guns. Then there are people on the other side of the walls of freedom, and this is America, and this is God's country, and so people have the right to protect themselves, and so God loves guns. Which one is it? You can't speak for God, all right? And I'm not weighing in on that at all, I'm just saying, like there are these different takes that people just say, okay, I'm going to drag God into it to win my case. No! His ways are not our ways. Instead, we must seek after the Lord. Okay? You're not God. I hate to burst your bubble. It's not you. And you're not even like God. You may bear His image. Okay, that's great. But we're operating on a different level. And so it's our job as individuals, as families, and as the people, most importantly, as the people who make up Hope Community Church, it is our job to seek after the true God, the one true God. To seek Him not in religious mythology, not to seek Him in culture, but to seek Him in this book, to get to know Him for who He really is. Now, we talked about it, I think we made the point. God's up here, we're down here. Listen, the only way that we can know anything about God and have any understanding of Him is because He desires to be known. This book exists. This is a testament to the fact that God desires to be known, and He can be found by those who seek Him. We must seek after Him in this book. We must seek after Him, and then share this God with the people in our lives, because this is a God who's worth knowing. This is a God who became a human being and died on the cross for us. This is a God that's worth knowing. This is a God who loves His children. This is the God who wants all of humanity, all of humankind to be redeemed. That's His greatest desire. It's a God that's worth knowing. So let's seek after Him and then go and share this God with the people in our lives.